Welcome to Intro to Motion Graphics 2021. In this series, you'll learn everything you need to know to get started in the world of motion design. Let's do it.
TipTut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Intro to Motion Graphics 2021 and to TipTut. We're going to carry on with our lesson today. We've created this stuff so far, which looks pretty good, to be honest. But now we're on to probably the most complicated part of the animation. That's this graphics section here. As you can see, if I double click my all footage and just scrub through it, when we have our graphics appear, that is the word graphics as well as the visual graphics, it comes in sections. These sections come together. There's spinning elements inside those sections. So the letters spin. Then there's this Venetian blinds kind of effect behind the text as well. And, excuse me, I just dragged the wrong timeline there. And the letters themselves also wiggle. So there's quite a lot going on here, but deceptively simple because it's actually all done with one composition. So let's just jump right into that. Here in my main composition, I'm just going to turn on our reference layer again. So we have our final thing and we'll zoom in. So as you can see, it starts off pretty simple with just a basic rectangle. So I'll use my eyedropper tool to just grab these colors to start with. And I'll draw a rectangle that's roughly the right size. We will rotate this at the end. And for now, just keep everything flat. So I'll just line it up visually so it looks about right. Doesn't have to be exact, of course, because we're remaking it. So that's our base colors there. Now, additionally, we're going to need that second rectangle around the outside. So I'm just going to hit Control G with my shape layer selected. And we'll name these. We'll name this rectangle. And we'll name this one line. The second one, which we've renamed line, I'm going to Alt click on the fill until that disappears. And then on the stroke, I'll just pick my blue color again for the basic color. And we'll paste that in place there. Then with the shape selected, we'll just drag this out to make it a little bit bigger. And we'll give it a stroke width of about 4. And that looks pretty good. Let's hide our reference layer because it's a bit distracting. And we're going to need the word graphics in text. So we'll just type that out too. Graphics. And I'm going to move my anchor point with the pan behind tool. And of course, you can use the shortcut Control Alt Home to place it directly in the middle, which is what we want to do. So then I'll scale this up and center it with my other shapes. So I'll just select all 3 of these shapes, go to my Align window and just choose Center, Center. So now they are all aligned visually to each other's center, which is great. So from here, we can pre-compose these. Right click and choose Pre-compose. And we'll just call this one Graphics and move all the attributes. Yes, indeed. Let's double click to go inside that. And now we're working once again in our isolated workspace, which is great. So first step is to change these colors of the backgrounds, rectangle and line, to a gradient. So I'm going to Alt click on my fill, which will give me a gradient. It's already popped it in place, which is great, but I'll just show you. You can select either color stop here, choose a color from your palette, paste that color in place, just check it's the right one, and hit OK. And then you can drag these sliders to position your gradient however you'd like. I'm going to do the same thing on the line around the outside, like M&M, and we'll reposition that, but the opposite direction. And now we've got this graphics gradient color going one way and the other way, which is perfect. Just like before, we're going to right click our text and choose Create Shapes from Text, which gives us our graphics as an outline. And also, just like before, we're going to duplicate and delete this layer until we have all of our letters separate. So GRAPHICS. Then on the first layer here, we'll just select all of these and delete them. On the second layer, we will select everything except the R and delete it and so on. And I'll just fast forward through that because we've done it before. So now we have all of our layers separated out into different sections, which is great. So we will select each of these layers here and press Control Alt Home, and that will place their anchor points in the middle, which is fantastic. So let's take a look at animating these first because it's the simplest bit. On all of these layers, we want the same thing to happen, which is the scale, so S, and the rotation, so Shift R to bring up both. And we just want them to spin and scale up. So we'll keyframe all of those, move over, say 1 second. So Control Shift right, right, right. Place another keyframe, and then back on our first keyframe, we'll put the scale down to 0. And on our second keyframe, we'll put the rotation up to 1 full-time round, so 1 plus 0 degrees. Select all these keyframes, hit F9, go to our graph editor, and make them go from fast to slow. So all the same stuff we've done before. You should be getting pretty consistent at this now. Looks okay, but let's sequence those layers so that they start one after the other. I'm going to press Control right, maybe 3 frames, and then Alt close square bracket to cut off my layer. Now we've done this before, I think, in this series. So I'm just going to Shift select all of these layers, right click, and choose Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. What this does is positions each layer in the order that you clicked them, one after the other with no overlap, as long as you set no overlap. Then we can just extend our layers again back to the end of the composition. And we have our layers now spinning in one at a time. They are, however, currently fills, and I do believe in the original that they were strokes. And then after the stroke has finished rotating in, we have this some kind of Venetian blinds effect in the background. So we'll fix that now as well. Let's go back to our motion comp. Sorry, not our motion comp, our graphics comp. And I will just Alt click with these layers selected until we remove our fill. Click once to get our stroke, make sure it's a white stroke. There we have our graphics word created. So to create this Venetian blinds effect, I'm actually going to duplicate my layers here. So G through to S, just duplicate that with Control D, and we'll press Control open square bracket to push them below. Then we can just pre-compose this just to keep it neat, and we'll call this graphics inner. Okay, so that's going to give us a composition underneath. If we go inside that composition, we can Alt click our stroke until that disappears. And once again, give ourselves a fill. This time we'll just make it black. And so we can see what we're doing. We'll just click this small button here next to the active camera pop up, which makes the background of our composition transparent. I'm going to just collapse all of this down until we get our keyframes, and we don't need our keyframes in here. So I'm just going to remove them by deleting them. And let's make sure that our layers are visible for the entire time. Now, if you haven't moved your playhead, you should be at the point where your last keyframe ended. If not, just go back to that last keyframe and go to your graphics inner again, and you'll find yourself just where that last keyframe is. We're then going to create an adjustment layer with Control Alt and Y, and we'll rename this Venetian blinds, and go to our effects and presets panel and find the Venetian blinds transition. If you apply it to the adjustment layer, it will affect everything underneath it, which is great. So we're just going to drag our transition completion up to 50% just for now, so we can see where what our work looks like. And I'm going to choose 45 degrees for this to put it at 45 degrees, obviously. Quite easy, this one. We'll just drag the transition completion to 100 and keyframe it. Go over 1 second, change that back to 50. Boom, there you go. Let's give it a bit of easing in the same way that we usually do. And we have our Venetian blinds coming in. Let's press Tab to bring up the mini composition flowchart, and go back up to graphics, and there you go. All we'll do now is we'll offset this a little bit just by moving it down. And let's try playing with the blending mode. What does soft light looks like? That looks much better. And let's drop soft light's opacity down to about 40%. And now we have our letters spinning in and our Venetian blinds appearing, which is fantastic. In our main footage, you can see that when the graphics appears and the background Venetian blinds is finished coming in, you'll notice that if you watch carefully, the line around the box fills in from start to end. So we just need to add a line trim to that line around the edge. So let's do that. Let's collapse everything. Oops, I keep going back to the motions one rather than the graphics one. It's my mistake. Let's collapse everything and take our line. and we'll just add a line trim to it. Very simple. So let's scroll this layer down and choose this add icon here, and we'll choose trim path. This one's nice and simple. We have a start and an end property. We're just going to drag the end property down to 0. You'll notice that it starts over here on the right-hand side. If I press Ctrl-Shift-H, that will hide and show our guidelines so I can just see more clearly. Where we actually want it to start is in the middle. So if you drag your offset back a bit until it goes to roughly the middle, and of course you can then press Ctrl-Shift-H to bring it back and make sure that it's perfectly in the middle, about there. Then when our line starts, it will start from that section. So let's keyframe the end position. Let's move over 2 seconds this time, and we'll drag the end position all the way up to 100. F9. And this time we'll make it start a little bit slowly and end a little bit slowly as well. So we get this nice easing in and out motion. Fantastic. Okay, so that is the setup for our graphics section done. Okay, so if you ignore all of this extra stuff that's happening on top here, excuse me, all this extra stuff that's happening on top, the inner portion of this animation is finished. So now the next section is just adding these boxes over the top and affecting how they piece together our graphics section. So whilst this looks fairly complicated, it's actually pretty simple. It's the same technique applied several times. So let's go inside our graphics composition here. And believe it or not, we're actually going to pre-compose everything once again. So we'll select everything here. We'll choose pre-compose, and we'll just call this graphics main. And now we have our main composition, inside of which has our graphics composition, inside of which has our graphics main composition, inside of which has all of our work. So we want to be on graphics main, this section here. If we go back up one, we are in the graphics composition. We are looking at graphics main. Okay. I'm going to draw a new shape on top. Let's just give it no fill and a red stroke. So I'll bring up my color palette once more, grab red. And again, my color palette's just in a web page on the other screen. And I'll draw myself a box over the center of our graphics pane. And you can center that quite easily with the Align tab. Just pop it in the middle of the composition and then drag it down until it's visually centered, which looks about right. And let's thicken up this border to about 8 pixels. It's a bit chunky. Let's make it 6. Okay, great. On that same layer, we're going to choose our rectangle tool once again. Let's draw, if we zoom in, on the same layer with the shape layer selected, a square over the edge of this corner. Then if we twirl down this rectangle too, and we choose stroke 1, we can reduce that stroke width to 0 here, which gets rid of it. And we can add a fill. You see here, fill 1 has already got a fill, but it doesn't actually compute. So if you delete that fill and on rectangle 2, just choose add fill again, that will actually fill it in correctly. Just a little quirk where we created it because it didn't have a fill before. And let's choose white. Now let's twirl this down so it's less distracting. And we'll select rectangle 2 directly, not the shape layer, but rectangle 2, and just press Ctrl D to duplicate it. And we'll position one of these at each corner. And we'll also position one in the middle of each line as well. Let's do the corners first. And this is making it look like a fake version of these controls here. Let's pop you in the middle. The reason I do it this way around is so that once I've chosen where the middle is on this rectangle, which is about there, I can duplicate that shape and just drag it down directly. So I don't have to worry about aligning these two because they're already aligned. Same thing if I go back to rectangle 5, for example, duplicate that. I can drag it down, find where I think the middle is roughly, duplicate it again, and then just, oops, I did the whole layer there, so you have to be careful. Duplicate it again, there we go, and move it across, and I know that it's at the right vertical height. Now, the reason we did it this way is that now I can adjust and scale this entire layer by itself. Those boxes look a little bit chunky, but I think I'll leave them for now. Doesn't matter too much. Great, so now we have our controller, which we're going to call controller. I'm going to take another rectangle and I'm going to select my graphics main layer and I'm going to draw a mask that aligns with the red line here. Like so. Okay. Bam. Now we have a mask over our graphics main layer and a controller on top that we're going to use to scale it. First thing I'm going to do though is duplicate my graphics main layer, delete the mask on the bottom one and just hide that so that we've got a raw copy that we're not editing. Okay, so now we have a raw copy and we have our duplicate copy as well. Let's take our duplicate graphics main and we'll just call this 1 and we'll call this 1C for controller. And I will pick whip layer 1 to layer 1C. And this means that when I move layer 1C, the rest of it moves with it. And you can probably see where we're going with this now. Let's find when we want this to appear. So if we go back to our graphics main, sorry, our main layer, not graphics main layer, we can see when we want this to start appearing. So we've got our shapes coming in. Let's have it appear about there. Let's check whether that aligns with our original footage. So when does it appear in the main composition? Yeah, just after the red comes up, we've got our shapes appearing here. So that works perfect for us. Let's go to our main layer, find when the red starts to appear in motion, which is about there. And then under our graphics layer, we know that this is the point where we'd like it to start. Okay, so I'm going to just choose scale, rotation, and position. And we're going to scale and rotate first of all. Let's make that take 1 second. Again, we're not going to rotate a full time round. We'll just go back to our first keyframe and choose maybe -45. Yeah. And the scale can be 0. So if we keyframe those and give them a bit of easing, we can then offset our rotation by selecting these keyframes and pressing Alt, Shift, and right. So now it scales up, rotates into position, and then at the last section, we want to move it into position. So we can do that by actually offsetting it in the first place. So let's just have this one move down. Now I've done those backwards accidentally, so I'll just select those keyframes, keyframe assistant, time reverse, and that'll just flip them around. Let's press F9 on those there, give them a bit of easing. And we want it to sort of move into position last. So that's already at the right position there. It's going to scale up, move across, rotate into position. Fantastic. You'll notice that our animation here on our graphics mains layers has already completed because that animation is already appearing here, that animation is already taking place here early in the composition before our animation is actually scaling and rotating into place. That's really easy. You just drag your layers here like so. Okay, makes sense. So let's clip this layer like so. And now we know we've got it starting in the right place, or at least one of these starting in the right place. Where we have our last keyframe, let's just duplicate 1 and 1C, pop them on top, and now we'll have 2 and 1C2. I will remove this mask to give us our full layer back. I will remove all keyframes from this layer, giving us a blank layer again. And that means that I can now unlink 2 from there so that when I move, when I move our controller layer, it is no longer directly affecting the layer. I can use that to scale its position down, or scale its position down, scale its scale down, and just move it into a separate position, say here, for example. Okay. I can then relink this layer, create another mask on 2, and repeat those steps. Okay. We're going to go back to here where the layer starts. We'll keyframe these. I'll do them all at once. So we know that rotation, let's have this one be 45 degrees as opposed to negative 45 degrees. Let's have the scale be 0. And let's have the position just be up and left a bit. So now it's going to move into position diagonally. Hit F9 on all of those. Give ourselves some easing. And then we can just offset them. So we want scale first, obviously, then rotation, then position. Now we have 2 of these taking place. And of course, if you want to, you can offset these so that they don't appear all at once. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, this is moving much slower than the original, but that's fine because we can speed it all up at the end. This just all comes into place a lot slower. You can see these ones just whip in a bit more if we watch that. And that's just because they're not a full second long, but save that to the end and we will just Alt drag these to make them much quicker and slower. Okay, so I'm going to go through now and create enough of these shapes that we cover pretty much everything, the whole of this section, but I will leave little gaps in the middle just to show you how I did it exactly the same as the example. So to keep things simple, I will not offset them for the moment. I will leave them all at the right time. I'll time lapse through the rest and we'll come out on the other side. Okay, so there you have it. I did something a little bit different with the last one, making it go from horizontal landscape to vertical or portrait, which I think looks pretty good. So the last step, once you've done all these, is to, first of all, just sequence them slightly. So we're going to collapse all these down. And seeing as there's only 4 layers, I'll just sequence them manually, probably a bit easier. I'll just go over 1, 2, 3 frames. Let's do the same here. 1, 2, 3 frames. And do the same here, 2, 3 frames. So now we have these layers coming in sequence. That looks much nicer. I'm going to select all these layers and press U, and we'll just speed this up a little bit. So we'll grab all of these. Maybe we want it to be finished by about here, and we'll hover over the last frame, hold Alt and drag, and this will compress your keyframes whilst maintaining all the animation. And that looks much nicer. There we go. So the last step is once all these pieces are in place, you're going to want to remember that original layer that we had before that we hid. Okay. You're just going to turn that layer back on, choose opacity and take, say, 15 frames to go from opacity 0 to opacity 100. So that just fades that in the background. And at the same time, just take all of these layers here, grab their opacity and put it down to 0. And then you have the boxes fading. Now you could, if you wanted to, offset this a little bit so that the pieces finish fading in and then the boxes fade away. And again, if you wanted to, you could offset your fading out keyframes as well. So 1, 2, 3, like so. Let's do 1, 2, 3 again. And the final one's 1, 2, 3 here. So now we have our keyframes fading out in sequence, which looks a little bit nicer. Let's save, go back up to our main composition and see what that looks like. Clicking here, fantastic. Boom, 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 boom. And we all have our pieces coming together like so. That looks pretty good if I do say so myself. Okay, I think I'm fairly happy with that. Let's just check it against the original, see if there's anything that we missed. Yes, we missed the wiggling of the letters inside our graphics symbol there. Very easy to do. So let's do that as our final step. Let's go inside our graphics main layer. So we have all of our wiggling letters here. And we'll press P to bring up the position keyframe in all of these. Okay. Now we could apply a wiggle expression to each one of these layers, but it means that whenever we want to change it, or if we want to change it, we'd have to come back through and change all of those individual layers. So instead, what I think I'm going to do is create an adjustment layer with a wiggle using sliders, and then we'll apply that to all of these layers underneath it. So inside our graphics main composition, we'll press Ctrl-Alt-Y to create a new adjustment layer, and we'll just name that wiggle. And on our adjustment layer, we are going to put something called a slider. In fact, we're going to put two slider controls. So we'll have first slider control and we'll have second slider control. I'll name the first one frequency, and I'll name the second one intensity, although it doesn't really matter what you name these. Okay. Right. So we're going to go to our first letter here, G, and Alt-click the position keyframe. Then we have to set some variables, okay? So we're going to say, I want the amount of times per second that it wiggles to be my frequency slider value. And I want the amount that it wiggles, the amount of pixels, to be my intensity slider value, okay? So inside here, we're just going to say frequency. So new variable, frequency equals, and then we will pick whip to this slider. Then we'll press semicolon to close the line of text. Then we'll say new variable, intensity equals. Looks like we can't call it intensity, so let's call it inten. Is that enough? Yes. So because that was blue there, I think that means that it's int is already like a reserved name, so we shouldn't call it int. We'll call it inten instead. Then we will drag to that slider and press semicolon. Then we will choose wiggle, open brackets, frequency, comma, intensity, close parentheses. And that gets rid of our warning, okay? So what we have now is the wiggle. This layer is going to wiggle based on frequency and intensity, which at the moment are 0, which means we should have no wiggle. Very good. If we crank these suckers up, we're going to have a crazy wiggle. Whoa, look at that wiggle. Okay, so that's probably a bit much. So what I want is it to gradually decrease in wiggle over time. So at the start, let's keyframe. Let's move over, say, to 2 seconds so that all of our letters are in place. And let's keyframe again. And here, let's say 6 times a second, I want it to wiggle 3 pixels. And that's what our wiggle is going to end up like. At the start, however, I want it to just be massive. Let's say like 6 times or 12 times a second, let's wiggle 30 pixels. And then it will go crazy and decrease. Because we have our values decreasing over time, it's going crazy. Look at all that crazy wiggle. And then it's reducing down to basically no wiggle here. Okay, let's just ease that out a little bit. Super amount of wiggle down to no wiggle. Perfect. Now what we need to do is just copy and paste this into our other position keyframes. So that should work now on the R, which it does indeed. So it comes into settle and then they start wiggling, which is great. So we'll just copy and paste that into all the others. Now, yes, there is some copy and pasting, which obviously takes a little time. But what this means is if I change any of those keyframes on the wiggle adjustment layer, it will change them for all of them here. So all of our letters are wiggling. If I were to, for example, make this go quicker, it would happen much quicker, like so. And I think that's a little bit too intense. So we will just reduce it down to, say, 5 times a second, 2 pixels. Oops, I did that on both accidentally there because I had all those selected. So we will just make sure that we didn't balls that up. And we'll go just to this keyframe and we'll choose 5 times a second, 2 pixels. And our final things are a bit less crazy. There we go. Perfect. Now let's look at that in our main composition and see what we've made. Perfecto. That looks pretty dang good to me. Well, there we have it. The second to last tutorial in this series, and we've got some nice motion going on now. In the next and final episode, we'll be doing two things. We'll be creating some small amounts of 3D text, as well as this kind of bloated After Effects logo, which looks really cool. Some 3D rotation text here, like so, and we'll be adding all this glorious texture on top as well. So thank you very much for joining me. I know this was a bit of a longer tutorial, but hopefully you still enjoyed it. And I will see you next time for the final episode of Intro to Motion Design or Intro to Motion Graphics 2021 and another episode of TipTut. Massive thank yous to my level 2 and above members: WN62, Ian Costello, Lone Wolf 16, Katmar, Rob V, Jason Carl Ruddy, MP, Dima Zuev, Volafers, Melem Hoover, Two Steps to Chill, Josh Colon, Ursula Fermanska, The Saucier, Lali Lulelo X, Andrew Hammond, Jana Kerry, JK Digital Creations, Jarbs Animations, Paul Jarman, Sergio Degalado, Ralika M, Narain Abdillah, and Barbara Resner. You guys are absolutely lovely. If you'd like to become a member of the TipTut Zone and become a Tip Titan yourself, click that join button below.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.